Today I have with me from Argentina, Marcelo Baudino, and Marcelo is a specialist in helping professionals to navigate the different cultural factors which impact on how business is conducted in Latin America and or South America. I'm not quite sure what to call it. Maybe we can ask Marcelo afterwards. So first question then, Marcelo, what is Latin America and is it different from South America?
Hello, David. Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. That's an excellent question, David. And it's very important to make a differentiation of what is South America and what is Latin America and what is America, especially if you're planning to come and do business in the region. When we're thinking about Latin America and South America, they obviously have something in common, which is America. And it's very important to notice that we consider ourselves to be Americans. And you know that many people in the world calls the people that is living in the United States of America, they call them Americans, which is funny because we also believe that we are Americans. But when we did make this differentiation of Latin America, we are talking about all those countries in the Americas that in a way speaks some of the Latin languages. We are thinking about Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So if we consider Latin America in that sense, we are talking about 20 countries that are involved in the region. All the countries in South America, which is part of Latin America, but also we need to include those countries in Central America, some countries in the Caribbean, and Mexico, of course, that even though it's part of North America, culturally, and because they speak Spanish, is part of Latin America. Is it clear, more or less, the differentiation?
That's pretty clear. That's pretty clear. Thank you. Thinking about Latin America as perhaps, one country, which if it were one country, what would it look like?
Well, that's an excellent question, David, because if we consider Latin America as one single country, it would be a really big country, which, in other words, it would be the third most populated country in the world, with more than 600 million of inhabitants. So we are talking about a huge mass of people. And of course, it would be only surpassed by India and China. But also, if we think about economic terms, Latin America, if it were a country, it would be the fourth biggest nominal GDP. So we're also talking about a huge and amazing market with all the opportunities that you can imagine considering the size of that market. But also, there are some other facts of Latin America. For example, Latin America is the most urban region in the world. We're talking about that more than 80% of the population is living in cities. So you can start thinking that they're going to find a lot of big cities. I can name you a few: Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Bogota, which are really very important cities. But also, if Latin America would be a country, it would be the most unequal and violent place in the world. And these two things are very correlated. I mean, it's not a coincidence that it's the most unequal and the most violent place in the world. So, well, this is giving you a general picture of the size of the market in terms of population, in terms of economy, in terms of cities, and some other facts.
What about Europeans? What do you see as some of the, quite typical cultural stumbling blocks that they could have in working with colleagues in Latin America?
I have, according to my experience, I have worked with many Europeans and US Americans coming to Latin America, and I can define 4 cultural stumbling blocks that I've seen that are more common when Europeans come into Latin America to do business. The first one, which is one of the most common cultural stumbling blocks, is the oversizing of the similarities. What does it mean? Basically, it means that they believe that Latin America constitutes one single and unique culture. So in a way, when they're expecting the similarities, they don't make any differentiation if they're interacting or working with Argentinians or with Colombians or with Brazilians or with Mexicans, when in actually it is a huge difference, and of course you need to adapt in a different way depending with who you are interacting with. So when you're expecting similarities, it might be kind of a barrier because whenever you're going to start facing differences, you're not going to be able to perceive them. So the first thing that I usually recommend to Europeans coming to Latin America is to break the stereotype of thinking that this is one single culture and we are all the same, and there are not going to be differences between us. And of course, we will be able to find some similarities between the different countries, but also you can expect a lot of differences. In the second place, something that is quite common and I have perceived in many Europeans coming to Latin America, especially those Europeans coming from developed countries, is this feeling of condescension. What does it mean? It means that in this sense that we know more than you know. You have to learn from us, or please see and learn how things work from here. I know that many of you probably don't have these feelings consciously, but I have perceived in many Europeans coming to Latin America this sense of superiority. Yeah. And of course, when you start dealing with Latin America and you have that perception, even though it doesn't show obviously, the first reaction of Latin American will be of resistance, of little collaboration. So it's very important to have a more empathetic point of view when dealing with Latin America. The third cultural stumbling blocks are stereotypes. And this is not to blame to people, but the media has a role in it. Hollywood has a role in it because they have portrayed an image of Latinos that many people start believing that is actually true. For example, that Latinos are lazy people, there are people that you cannot trust, and that every time a Latino has the chance, they will be willing to cheat you. This is far from being true. Even though that you might find some Latinos that are like that, it's not the majority, and most probably the people that you are going to be working with, it's not going to be this case. Of course, you need to know how to build trust with Latin American people, but be careful of your own stereotypes, because it's very important if you're planning to develop a good and productive working relationship to break the stereotypes and start understanding people. And last but not least is language. Especially when you start interacting with different countries that speak Spanish, you will start believing that Spanish is exactly the same in any Latin American country, when this is not the case, because the Spanish from Argentina is quite different from the Spanish from Mexico or from Spain. Even though we can understand each other, how we speak, slangs, different expressions, or what to say and when to say it is different depending on the country you are interacting with. So you need to be careful with, especially if you start speaking Spanish or if you manage to learn Spanish, because you will have different challenges with your Spanish depending on the country you are interacting with.
Interesting. Okay. So that's quite challenging, really, for people who may come from Spain or perhaps come from Italy, who may have, reasonable intermediate Spanish. They may find themselves finding difficulty moving from one South American country to another, right?
Yeah, that's true, David. It is a challenge, but if you are aware of that, you can start taking some precautions, like putting the thing in the topic, start discussing about that beforehand, and trying to understand what words might have a different meaning in different countries, in order to avoid some misunderstanding or some clashes that, well, I have many examples of, even between Latin American countries, that they start having problems because they believe that what they say, it was clear for the other people, but actually they understood something else. Words, for example, that in Mexico use a lot, for example, ahorita, while in Argentina, it doesn't have any meaning because we don't use it. So Argentinians get very confused about what's the real meaning of that word when they're talking. And it's very common from Mexico. And even from Mexico's, they don't really what it means because they usually so normally that it's difficult for them to, well, how would you describe that word? Well, it's different and it's special and it has a meaning in a particular context. And of course, I mean, the region, Latin America is a huge region. We're talking about €3 or €4. So you can expect a lot of differences between the different countries.
What distinguishes Argentina from some of the other neighboring countries in Latin America? And one or two of the historical events that have kind of created the Argentinian psyche or mindset?
When we're talking about Argentina, this is one critical sentence that describes a lot about Argentina. It is said that Argentina is the Europe of Latin America. Why so? Because the immigration process that occurred in the history of the country it has no comparison in any other countries of Latin America. So when we're talking about 1 century ago, the immigration process that started because Argentina was a barely populated country, and the governors of those times wanted to populate the country, and they thought, okay, which people do we need in order to populate the country, because we don't want to include the people that are actually living there, the natives of the Argentinian lands. So what I did was to open the immigration process for Europeans. And it's funny because the governments of those times, they actually wanted European from Northern Europe. They wanted people from Germany, from Denmark, from Sweden, and so on. But at the end, after 100 years of immigration process, 51% of the immigrants that arrived to Argentina were Italians, especially from the north, but also from the south of Italy. For example, in my case, I have Italian descendancy. My surname is Italian. I'm Baudino, coming from the Piemontese area in Italy. So that changed a lot the thinking and the belief for the Argentinian culture, because many Argentinians don't consider themselves to be Latins. Actually, it's make a clash. I mean, it's funny for us to consider ourselves Latins. We actually were thinking and looking in the old good times of Europe, and we have Italy or Spain as a reference, as a model for us, which in a way is a challenge for Argentinians, because many Latin America don't consider Argentinians Latin as well. So in a way, we are in the middle. We are not Latin America, but we are not European at the same time. So whenever you come to Argentina to do business, you will see that Argentina is kind of the perfect transition between Europe and the rest of Latin America, because we have maintained certain traits, certain European traits, since our gastronomy, but also in our communication style, in the way we approach business, in the perhaps informality on our relationships, and we also have a more egalitarian perspective in terms of communicating with the bosses or with the people with a more higher hierarchy than others.
What would you advise Europeans coming and working or collaborating with colleagues in Argentina? What would you say are some of the keys to building trust in an Argentinian context, bearing in mind that they may be coming from a European tradition?
Relationships in Argentina are critical. Contacts, having the right connections to do business, and so on. And of course, there are some different channels to develop that relationship. And of course, the business always has some sort of impact in the personal lives of people. So you really need to be able to commit and start developing the relationship beyond the business side of the area. And with that, I include talking about personal stuff, having lunch, or going to dinners with people, trying to understand a little bit more about the roots of the culture and understanding their problem and how they think. Everything is really important in sense of developing the trust Argentina needs in order to be able to say, okay, I'm going to be committed to you in order to help you develop the business you want to do in Argentina. So I believe that investing some time, and well, this takes time, as you can imagine. Investing some time in developing this relationship in Argentina is very important in order to move to the next step of doing business. But at the same time, which is something different to the rest of the Latin American countries, is you can use a more informal approach in developing those relationships. We are not talking about nobody in Argentina you're going to find using a tie, for example, unless it is a very formal aspect of the business life, it's quite common not to use a title and be very informal, even when they are communicating or become friends quite easily, because they are really striving to get to know you and start talking about your interests, about football, about what you're preferring in terms of food and what you have enjoyed about the country and so on. So this is something that is very particular about Argentina.
Let's move geography a little bit and shift towards the west. For example, if we move from Argentina to Chile, what are some of the factors that you found distinguish a Chilean approach to building relationships, to working style?
Well, when we start thinking about Chile, we cannot forget about the geography. Chile is divided, has a natural geography that in a way has isolated the country, because in one side you have the Andes Mountains, which is one of the biggest mountains all over the world, and on the other side you have the sea. So in a way, for many, many years of the history of Chile, the country had to develop a personality, a way that it was very distinctive from other different countries in the region. And the connection that they had with other countries were minimal. This is one of the reasons why Chile needed to start looking to do business with other countries beyond Latin America before many other countries in Latin America. And actually, Chile has more commercial trade agreements with a lot of countries, more than any other countries in Latin America. They are part of the NAFTA, for example, together with the United States, Mexico, and Canada. They are part of Mercosur as well. They have commercial treaties with other regions in Asia, in Europe, and so on. But also, at the same time, the Chile has developed a more distinctive, clear hierarchies when it comes to communicating between different people that are at different levels. The social classes, the distinction in social classes you can see in Chile, how formal they communicate with other people, or the distance that the bosses have together with the rest of the employees is clear and very different to the one in Argentina, for example. So employees most probably will be expecting to tell them what to do and how to do it, and so on. But another unique criteria and aspect of the Chilean culture is that, well, they have a lot of influence from the German immigration, especially in the south of Chile. So when we're talking about rules and relationships, Chile, compared to other Latin American countries, is probably the country that it's going to give a bigger priority to the rules compared to the relationships. And this is not a minor piece of information, because just to give you a small example, if you're planning to cross the street in any country in Latin America, you need to be careful, because every car is going to have the priority and go first. But in Chile, whenever you are in a corner and you want to cross, the cars will stop and let you cross. This doesn't happen in any Latin American country except by Chile. So that gives you a sense of what rules and sometimes have a bigger priorities than relationships, even though the relationships still are important. So hierarchies and rules are a particular part of the Chilean culture.
So if we moved up to Peru, what happens? What are some of the, I know we're talking in quite big generalizations here, yeah. and people will be dealing with individuals, of course, but I think it's useful to give a sense of that Latin America is more complex than those original stereotypes that people may have, and they may put Latin America together. So what are a couple of the distinguishing features that you found in Peru, for example?
Well, Peru at the moment is the start of South America. What do I mean by that? I mean that all the markets are focused on Peru, and Peru has been growing economically more than any other countries in South America. But also this gives you the idea that it's one of the latest emerging market in the region. If we think about Chile or Argentina, they are one of the markets that has been more developed beforehand. So Peru after a lot of internal struggles with terrorist movements and some critical challenges that we're facing internally, 15 years ago, in a way, they figured that out, and they had a chance of opening the economy and welcoming a lot of companies to start investing in Peru and starting to do business, something that never happened in the history. So this is why at the moment is the moment to be in Peru or Colombia, for example, because they are, for the first time in Peruvian history, they are starting to see opportunities. They are starting to have the opportunity of having education, of doing business, of having a lot of foreign investment. So that's why it's important to stress that the moment that Peru is living is new. You're gonna find a lot of energy. You're gonna find a lot of foreigners coming to live in Peru, because the lack of talent sometimes might be a challenge, because in this transition, Peru hasn't developed yet all the professionals they need in order to help the development of the country. This is in one side, talking about macroeconomic aspects. On the other hand, the influence of Native Americans in the Peruvian cultures is evident. I mean, you can perceive it in the physiognomy of the population, in how people look. And because of the colonization process and the influence that the Spanish conquest has on this side of the population, we're talking about the country where the Incan Empire, one of the most important empires before the colonization, had the headquarters in Peru, in Cusco. So the influence of the indigenous and the native Casian values, you can see it until nowadays. You will also see that a hierarchy. You can also be classified in terms of the skin of the people. So probably some whiter people might have, only because they have a clearer skin, have a more hierarchy, or people will pay more respect to those people than other people that have more brown or darker skins. So this is another, because of the influence of the native, you can see a division of societies based on the color of the skins.
Colombia. Let's move right up further north there. You mentioned Colombia as the other new place to be.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about a few insights that you might be able to share with us about your experience and consulting work that may be linked to how better to understand working with Colombians.
Well, this is something, Colombia has an advantage that there is no other countries in Latin America that has it. And the advantage of Colombia is that you can find many powerful cities or many opportunities in different cities in the country. So for example, if we are thinking about Argentina, it's mainly Buenos Aires, which has more power than any other city altogether in the rest of the country. If we're talking about Chile, it's basically Santiago. If we're talking about Peru, it's basically Lima. But this is different in Colombia, because in Colombia, the power is distributed among different countries, among different cities. We're talking about Bogota, that has a lot of opportunity, but it's in the middle of the country, far away from ports, for example. Then you have Medellin, the second biggest city, where you have a lot of huge and amazing talents of people that are entrepreneurs, that have a lot of energy, which at the same time have a distinctive culture. Then we can be talking about Cali, we can be talking about Barranquilla, we can be talking about Manizales, different cities that, depending on the opportunities and your business and the type of geography that you're looking for, you might be choosing a different city, and that's okay. So this is an advantage that any other country in Latin America has. And why is that? Because of the geography. The geography in Colombia is unique because the Andes Mountains divide into 3 channels or roads when they enter Colombia. So you can find cities that are in the middle of the mountain, some people that are in the middle, some people that has an exit to the Atlantic Ocean or the Caribbean, some other cities that have an exit to the Pacific Ocean, some other people that are in the Amazons and in the jungle. So you can see in terms of geography that Colombia has a lot of advantages, and you will also see that working with people from Bogota, it's gonna be completely different than working with people from the coast. That is why you can find 5 different Colombias depending with whom you're working with. If you're working with people with the Amazon, it's going to be totally different than working with people from the coast or working with people from Bogota, for example. Bogota, just to give an idea of Colombia, when you think about Colombia, you think about, oh, it's going to be very hot and you're going to have a sea. But Colombia is almost 3,000 meters above the sea. So it's cold all year long. So even the people from Bogota have a distinctive attitude and behavior because of the weather. I mean, they are thinking about it's going to be raining, it's going to be cold or not. They're going to dress differently. They are much more formal than people that are in the coast, for example. They are much more informal and casual because all day long it's really hot. And Medellin, for example, that I believe that it is the star within Colombia. Everybody's talking about Medellin at the moment. The energy of the population, the weather. Medellin is the city of the never-ending spring. So you can find a spring all year long. It's a wonderful weather. And of course, as I told you, Colombians might be different to Peruvian because the influence of native has been different. You can start finding some African influence, especially into the Pacific part of the countries. But also a lot of European influence, British, Spanish, Jew, and so on, have created a distinctive culture that it will vary a lot depending on the sub-region that you're working with.
I'd like to shift down to quite a distinctive and very large country, which is Brazil. And of course, that's where there is a major linguistic division. With just a couple of minutes to kind of put Brazil in the context of the rest of Latin America, what are some of the points that you would make?
Well, the minute you see to South America as a map, you can see that South America has been divided into 2. One Portuguese-speaking country, which is Brazil, and the rest Spanish-speaking countries. But the funny thing is that the Spanish-speaking country, we have argued and fight between each other, and we have divided into 9 different countries. But Brazil has kept the unity as one single culture. So why is that? Because the influence that we have from the parents' countries, Spain and Portugal, has been clearly defined in each of our countries. And we all know that Spanish and Portuguese are different people. So exactly the same happened with Brazilians and the rest of the Latin American countries. So in a way, Brazilians argue, they're able to discuss a lot, etc., but they figure everything out with the conversation topics, with the energy and the emotion that they can connect when they are communicating between each other. But at the same time, as you just mentioned, geography is a huge country. It's the biggest countries in Latin America. So you can obviously expect cultural differences between the different regions. And just to give you an idea, we're going to divide the country into 2, the north part and the south part of Brazil. The north, the influence of the African culture in the north has been decisive. I mean, when we're talking about the north of Brazil, we're talking about an African culture. So in that way, where even though it has the largest population of Catholics in the world, the influence of African beliefs and religion in the north is present until nowadays. And you can see it in the skin of the people well, actually, just to make a distinction, the Brazilian dictionary has more than 100 ways of differentiate color skin. Black, dark black, chocolate black, and browns, and so on. So you can find the mixtures of different ethnicities and different cultures in Brazil. Is one of the unique places all over the world. But if you come to the south, to the southern parts of Brazil, you start seeing a lot of different immigration process. Italians, Japanese, Germans, Lebanese people. Actually, when we're thinking about Japanese people, what is the biggest Japanese city outside Japan? Actually, São Paulo. It has the biggest concentration of Japanese outside Japan. It happened the same with some other nationalities. So this is why you're going to find a lot of differences if you're dealing with people from Sao Paulo, one of the biggest cities all over the world, or if you're dealing with people from the southern part of Brazil, which are more similar to Argentinians or to Brazilians in terms of informality and so on, because of the immigration process as well. If you go to the north, you're going to find a bigger division between color skins, and you probably will find, even though they might relate in an informal way, the hierarchies are very present when you are dealing and interacting with Brazilians. And of course, then you have a barrier, which is the language. Many people from Latin America, especially Argentina, when they come to Brazil, they believe that they can speak Portuguese. They actually call Portuñol, which is a mixture between Spanish and Portuguese. But still, the gap in understanding and in the language is very important. And it's not that easy to understand between each other.
The issue of relationship seems to be important in most of South America, and I think, you know, those who come from a Southern European tradition like Spain and Italy, you know, would also say that, you know, these are relationship-based societies. But how do we manage relationships between Europe, particularly Southern Europe, and Latin America when they're mediated by video conferences like we're having here to keep in touch, traveling to, you know, for example, Chile? Nobody arrives in Chile by mistake. You know, you have to go there, you know, and it's a long way to get there. So how do you build those relationships at a distance? Have you got any suggestions that perhaps things that they should focus on more, or things to avoid in order to create breakdowns in relationships at a distance?
Well, as you said, I mean, relationships is something that is very important to any Latin American country. So it's something to keep in mind, and you need to do something in order to develop that relationship. And sometimes when we are working virtually, we forget about the relationship because it's like, well, we're talking to a machine, so we don't need to invest time in developing the relationship. But this is far from being the right approach when we're working with Latin Americans. The first things, if you have the chance, of course, it depends on the budget, but if you have the chance, especially at the beginning of working with somebody, is traveling to the country, to the city, and getting to know each other, at least spend a few days face-to-face, sharing a coffee, sharing a meal, getting to know the person personally. Of course, if you had that chance, it's going to help you all along the process of working afterwards virtually. So this is something to keep in mind if the budgets give us the possibility of doing that. If not, even though we're communicating virtually, even though we're sending emails, we need to put some times in our agenda, in our calendar, to have informal meetings virtually, just like sharing a coffee or investing 30 minutes just to talk about anything but business. And of course, I mean, if my focus or my team is going to be based in Argentina, I need to know and read a little bit more about Argentina in order to put topics that Argentina will really interested to talking about. For example, in Argentina, we have elections this year. To ask about that and ask questions and show interest in what is going on in the country, for sure it's going to give the Latins an idea that this person is really involved in the project and don't only want to do business, but also want to have a good climate and have fun and enjoy what they're doing, and also getting to know each other a little bit more. So this is something that I recommend it a lot. And of course, that is going to vary a lot depending on the country, because with Argentina, it's all right to talk about politics. But of course, try to avoid talking about politics if you are dealing with a Colombian team, which is something that you don't put in the table. But you can talk a lot about football. If you say or you mention James Rodriguez in Colombia, you're going to be loved immediately, because this is the star at the moment and everybody is really happy about that. Or for example, at this moment, it has just started the Copa America, which, you know, football is something that is very important and we are very passionate about that. So this is something that is something that we are discussing at the moment. So if you have the knowledge and you can connect with me with the knowledge and the sense that we can discuss about something in common, apart from just talking about the weather, it will help a lot in building trust with the person.
Marcelo. Thank you very much indeed for this very quick, because you have so much experience. We'd like to talk to you more, but thank you very much indeed for helping us to have a quick tour around South America, Latin America, and we hope to be in touch with you very shortly, and I'm sure you can help us more in the future.